Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom, take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods. No grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, one of those everyday people with diabetes I'm always mentioning, Stephen Shaul, was diagnosed as an adult. And he says while it took him a while to find peer support, it's been invaluable.
Once I discovered the online community, it really made a huge difference for me, and being able to kind of think about things that I had not really considered before. So the Me Too is great, but also there's a wealth of information out there.
Stephen shares his story and how he found a way to get involved in policy on the state level. Plus, something a little different, I had the chance to talk to Dominique Wilkins, NBA superstar, who was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes just as he retired.
Just decided that I was going to, use it as another opponent I compete with. As long as I stayed ahead of it, I was winning.
And in our Know Better segment, new guidelines for adjusting insulin dosing based on the Dexcom CGM. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I'm so glad to have you with me. Love doing this. And we've maybe got some new folks because it's been a busy travel time already, been going place to place. So if you're just joining me because you saw me at a JDRF Type 1 Nation or another conference, thanks for tuning in. I'm glad to have met you, and I'm really glad that you found the show. Quick note about travel. I'm kind of hedging my bets here because I'm taping this episode right before I'm supposed to go to 2 different conferences, but the weather's looking really crummy and I'm not sure I'm going to get to anything. So I'm supposed to go to Boston this week. I'm supposed to go to Greensboro, North Carolina, which is really just up the road from me. So I think that'll happen, but I will definitely talk about those 2 in our next episode, depending on what happens. Time shifting for podcasts is kind of strange. I'd love to do it live or same day, but, maybe that is something in the future. But anyway, if you're new to the show, we aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connections, interviewing actors and athletes, celebrities, authors, and leaders in our community, as well as everyday people, like I'm doing this week. And asking tough questions to the healthcare companies and speaking to the tech folks that kind of push everything along. And my son was diagnosed just before he turned 2, 11 years ago. My husband has type 2 diabetes, and my background is in radio and television broadcasting, and that's how you get the podcast. Another quick note looking backwards. We talked about Fear Factor and Brec Bassinger being on that show. Brec is a young Hollywood actress. She lives with type 1, and she just marked 10 years with type 1, actually. And she won. She won Fear Factor. So how about that? That was great. Apparently there was a lot more involved than just the cell phone and the blender, as I mentioned. Looking for cell phone codes through spiders and tarantulas. And I can't watch Fear Factor. I'm sorry, Brec. But it's just one of those shows that there's just no way. But I'm always glad when someone with type 1 gets something that they've wanted for a long time, and apparently this was one of her dreams. I read that Brec had a Fear Factor themed birthday party when she was younger. So, okay, we all have dreams, and I'm glad hers came true. All right, a lot of good stuff coming up today. First, let me tell you about Dexcom, one of our sponsors, and one of the best features of the Dexcom G5 Mobile, the customizable alerts and alarms. Customizable threshold alerts provide advance warning of hypo and hyperglycemic events before they happen. Alerts help Benny, my son, when he's distracted during times like recess or sleeping and just being a normal teenager. We found it incredibly helpful to troubleshoot high blood sugars before they get too high and to catch lows before they get too low. When Benny's out hanging with friends, playing ultimate frisbee, which is his new thing right now, I love that the Dexcom will alert him if he needs to take action. And peace of mind for overnights is great. I can't imagine using a continuous glucose monitoring system without alarms. It just wouldn't really work for us. Find out more about the Dexcom continuous glucose monitoring system at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. My guest this week has been living with type 1 diabetes since 1991. He was diagnosed as an adult. And like a lot of people who don't get to go to diabetes camp or have, nosy parents who really look for support, he felt like he was on his own for a long time. Stephen found the diabetes online community in 2011. And he says it changed his life, and we'll talk about that. He started blogging. He has become a very outspoken advocate, attending FDA workshops. He's been in clinical trials, and he has served as a facilitator for the Diabetes Unconference, which is where I met him most recently. I've met Stephen before, but that was the jumping off point for this interview. Stephen is currently on Maryland's Advisory Council on Health and Wellness, and he was just named to the 2018 Reader Panel at Diabetes Forecast magazine. Here's my interview with Stephen Shaul. Stephen, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I've talked to you before. We've met in person. It's unusual that happens first, and then we talk for the podcast. But I'm so glad you had some time for me today. Thanks.
Hey, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Let's just start jumping in with your story. How did you find the diabetes online community?
Oh, wow. Okay, so going back to diagnosis, I was diagnosed in January of 1991. I was age 28, almost 29, and I pretty much just kind of rolled along managing my diabetes as I went along, and I was ever increasingly unhappy with that and just in general with life for a while. And probably summer or fall of 2011, my wife comes home or she calls me on the phone actually at work, and she was very excited. She had heard an interview on the local NPR station from someone who was talking about artificial pancreas research and what that meant and how it all worked. I don't even remember who it was. She was very excited about it, and she's like, I'm going to have you listen to this when you come home. So I came home from work that night, and we listened to the replay, and we just listened almost in silence the whole time. And when it was over, she turned to me and she's like, isn't this exciting? Aren't you really excited about this? You should find out more about this. And I thought, well, what do you want me to do about this? And she said, well, just go and research it a little bit. Google it. Somebody's probably writing about it on a blog or something. And so I went the next day and went up to Google and typed in diabetes blogs, and I got a whole slew of diabetes blogs and somehow discovered this diabetes online community that up until that point I didn't even know existed.
It really is incredible once you jump in and see what's there, how much of it is there. Do you remember that feeling of the next maybe 6 months or a year after the time when you found them? Can you do maybe a little comparison of how you felt before, how you felt after?
So before I was going through a lot of tough stuff at work, and really unrelated to this, but at the same time, with diabetes management, I was managing. I wasn't doing great. My A1C was probably in the 8-9 range. And I just felt like this is as good as I'm going to do. And I had also probably had a lot of things buried deep inside, feelings that I just was not happy about and didn't have a way to express that, didn't have a way to express what it was like to live with diabetes. And so I discovered the community. I found all these people writing, and it was remarkable, some of the things. I mean, I really had the same thing a lot of people have, which is that Me Too moment where you go, yeah, that's Me Too. I experienced that. I know exactly what that means. And so over the course of the next maybe 6 months, I read a lot of blogs, commented a lot, and then I had wanted to start a blog, but held off for quite a while, and then on April 9th, 2012, which was my 50th birthday, I started my blog, Happy Medium, and kind of went from there.
Wow. As a parent of a child who was diagnosed very young, I am always amazed to hear of adults who are diagnosed and just don't get the same kind of support that the kids get. Can you talk a little bit about being diagnosed at 28? I mean, I can't imagine that you and your family goes through the same kind of education and everything that we did. And I've talked to a lot of adults who feel that maybe, they just were kind of given the medication and said, okay, good luck.
Yeah, that's kind of how it happened. It was 1991, so it's not like technology was fantastic. My meter, I think, at that time took about 45 seconds to give me a reading, which seems horrible when you think about it in today's terms, but it was miles beyond what someone maybe 15 years earlier had at their disposal. So, but I had no frame of reference for any of that. I didn't know any of that. There was a lot of, okay, here's what you do. You take this amount of insulin twice a day, go on with your life, be happy, and do whatever you can do. And then I didn't see an endocrinologist for, forever. And I was just managing it with the help of the internist who had diagnosed me, who was a great guy. I mean, he's still my parents' primary doctor. So, yeah, there was just not a lot of education for me. It was just whatever I learned in the hospital, and that was pretty much it. There was no real internet by that point, although it was kind of getting started. Once I discovered the online community, it really made a huge difference for me, and being able to kind of think about things that I had not really considered before. So the Me Too is great, but also there's a wealth of information out there, and more coming online every day, which is really very helpful for me. I never had the experience of, a diabetes camp or anything like that. I don't even know what that was like, but it is what it is. So in that way, I tend to be still very practical. I'm the kind of person who just says, well, of course I didn't experience any of that, but that's okay. I mean, it's not like I'm going to go back and be Benjamin Button and revert to my childhood again. So, this is just how it goes. So I think in that regard, maybe it is a little difficult, but I think it's more when you're diagnosed as opposed to what age you're diagnosed that it really matters.
What do you mean by that, yearly? Like how long?
So
or
being diagnosed for me in 1991 is way different from someone who was diagnosed in 1981 or someone who was diagnosed in 2011. The kind of care or the kind of standards of care or the kind of information available to everyone changes over the years, and I think that has a lot to do with how people pick up managing their diabetes from diagnosis. And I think it has more to do with that than it has to do with I was diagnosed at age 6 or I was diagnosed at age 28 or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You mentioned also learning more from your peers and from the online community than from doctors over the years. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because one of the things that struck me when I went to the Unconference for the first time was one of the sessions, and you were kind of the moderator, keeper there, of keeping everybody on track, was when people just shared information, and these are just lay people talking about what they've heard, what they know, what works for them. It's pretty amazing to sit in a room and see that wealth of knowledge.
Yeah, it is. And I think Cristela Priliano really explains it very well when she says, look, I'm the expert in my diabetes, and you're the expert in your diabetes, and someone else living with the diabetes, they're expert in their diabetes. Everybody's diabetes is different. Our pancreases are the ones that are all the same, and the fact that they don't work. So what that means is that there may be something that I'm doing that is particularly helpful for me. It may not necessarily be helpful to half of the room, but the other half of the room might find it very interesting because they had never considered that before. And one of the great things that the Unconference does is it allows people to get together and share their knowledge.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to see, and it is a wealth of knowledge when you get that many adults who've been living with diabetes for that long together, and some very newly diagnosed, but to talk about it. Would you mind, I'm trying to remember the story that you told, and it was about falling asleep on your way home from work. Was that it? Was there an improvement that you made? I'm sorry to catch you off guard with that, Stephen, but I'm trying to remember what you were talking about that day.
It could have been me passing out on the subway on the way home from work, which actually happened one time.
We'll find out more about that story and the very lucky way that Stephen got help in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneTouch. Handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The OneTouch Vario Flex meter seamlessly syncs with the free OneTouch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the OneTouch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, OneTouch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the OneTouch Vario Flex Meter and OneTouch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneTouch logo. And now back to Stephen sharing a story of a scare on the way home from work.
I was very low, and it was when I was training for a triathlon. And,
oh, wow.
Yeah, these are sprint triathlons that I've done. So these aren't like the mega Ironman, super lengthy ones that other people do. But I was training for a triathlon. I was doing a lot. I hadn't really adjusted my pump at all, the basal rates on my pump. And so as a result, I was still pumping the same amount of insulin, but my body was using the insulin way better than it was before. And I just didn't, those are some of the things. This is before I discovered the online community. So that's one of those things that I never considered. I never considered the fact that I'd be using insulin better and that I probably needed to adjust my basal rates. And before I found that out, I wound up passing out on the subway coming home, which was not a pleasant experience. Everybody had to take an extra, 20 minutes to get home that day.
Oh, gosh. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, your health was in danger there. But
it was, and I was lucky in a number of ways. There was a guy that I actually go to the gym with who was on that train. He was on a car behind me, and he saw them wheel me out. And he's like, "Wait a minute, I know that guy." and because they didn't know if diabetes was far down the priority list for them for
Sure.
checking. From their perspective, I could have been drunk, I could have been out, on drugs or whatever. They didn't know. But he said, "Hey, wait a minute, I know that guy." So there was that, and then also it was at a stop that is about 10 minutes from where I live. So they got my phone out, and I have, fortunately, in my contact list, a number that says home, and they called home, got my wife. My wife came down. Everything ended up okay.
Wow, I'm glad to hear that. That's got to be scary. Yeah, I learned how to adjust basal rates at a Friends for Life conference in 2010. It's an embarrassing story, but I tell it so that hopefully people could learn from it. But we were 4 years plus into diagnosis and 3 years on a pump. And it never occurred to me that a temporary basal rate was something that the pump would do itself. I could just tell it 25% or, I thought I had to do all the equations myself and then reprogram the pump. And, these things that we don't learn because we don't see our educators and our endocrinologists. And at the time, I don't even think I was on Facebook, maybe 2008, 2009, maybe. But it certainly wasn't the social media that it is now. And I just remember feeling both that I felt so dumb and then I felt so relieved. And then I thought, well, what else don't I know? And it really opened the door. You've got to make those mistakes to open the door to learn more, I think. At least that's what I tell myself, so it's not too embarrassing, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm sure your experience is very similar to mine, and it's probably similar to many other people's experiences as well. And here's the thing, Stacey, is that one of the things we talked about at the conference was, we all manage our diabetes in a different way. We manage it in a way that works for us. So, yeah, temporary basals I use every single time I work out. If I'm doing an event like a long bike ride or something like that, then I'm going to set a temporary basal that is different than I would for any other day of the year probably. And I have all of that pretty much in my head, what I want to do, and it's also based on whatever I've been experiencing in the weeks leading up to that. But other people are very, very diligent, and they may have it all written down. They may all have it on their phone. This is what I do for this instance in this case. And that works for them. It wouldn't work for me, but we're both successful. And that's kind of part of the interaction a lot of times that goes on with the Diabetes Unconference when we're talking about managing things.
Yeah, it really is a nice sharing of information and learning from one another. You have really gotten involved. I mean, I'm surprised to kind of hear you say you jumped into the online community in 2011, because I feel like you've been there forever. But you've jumped in with, if you blog, you do occasional podcasts, and you've also You've got a really nice program that you do for athletes. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is all about?
Sure. Actually, I think it was 4 years ago this month. I got this idea, and I brought it home to my wife, and I said, well, what do you think? And sometimes she'll say, oh, I think it's a terrible idea, and I'll still do it anyway. But in this case, she thought it was really super exciting. She would love me to be doing even more with it than I have been doing. And for me, I think I've got my toes in a lot of different places, so I'm not sure that I have the capacity to work on it more than I do. But we came up with this idea where we were going to have medals produced. Originally, it was from an outside vendor in the next state, and today it's actually from somebody here in the local zip code. And what we do is we put together these medals, and they are engraved on the back. It says "Champion Athletes with Diabetes." It's gold. It looks like like something you'd get at the Olympics, except it's not made of gold. And it's got a nice blue ribbon on it. And what we tell people is write us, tell us if you're living with diabetes or someone you care about is living with diabetes. Write us and tell us about the athletic event that you did that really means a lot to you, and we will send you a medal. And we put together a little certificate with it, and we send it out with the medal. And we've sent those to people who have participated in ballroom dancing competitions and people who have done their first 5K in their 50s and people who have done JDRF rides for decades and people who have done any number of things. We've managed to get them out to, I'm pretty sure, 5 continents now and a bunch of states. I can't even remember. I can't remember how many states and how many countries we sent them to. But we get responses all the time on those, and we've given away about 86 or 87 to this point over 4 years. Yeah.
Why was something like that important to you? I mean, how did that pop into your head?
Well, a lot of times you'll talk to them about athletics, or they'll say, I'd really love to be able to do a 5K, but I just have trouble managing my diabetes, and, you can tell they really want to do it, but they're not making the commitment, and it's okay if you don't make the commitment and you still want to do it. There are plenty of things that I do, that I want to do, that I don't wind up following through on with that. Last year I was dying to do the American Diabetes Association ride over on Maryland's Eastern Shore, which is a wonderful event, and it's also very flat, which makes it a great bike ride. And I had trained for it and then wound up having to do something out of town that weekend and wound up bailing on it. So those things happen, but, when you do make the commitment to do it, it feels good, and that should be recognized and it should be rewarded. And it just makes me feel really good to be able to help people do that.
How can somebody apply for a medal?
So they can write a letter to champswithdiabetes@gmail.com. Tell me about the name of the person and what the event is and the address. I need your address because I got to know where to send the medal. And that's pretty much it. Wow.
And how do you pay for it? Do you pay for it?
I pay for it out of my pocket. It's not as expensive as you might think, especially when you stretch out 80-some over 4 years of doing it. It's not killing me to be able to do it, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's something that, hey, if a sponsor stepped up and said, we'd really like to help you do this, that'd be great, but I'm not searching for that. It makes me feel good to be able to do this, and I don't feel like it's putting a large dent in my wallet at this point.
I just think that's such a nice thing. That is terrific. Good
Thanks.
for you. Oh, of course. Another thing I wanted to ask you about is, I don't know how you have time for any of this, but you were also recently named to the Maryland Advisory Council on Health and Wellness. So you're, mucking around in state government now, trying to help other people out. How did that happen?
Yeah, that was really a strange turn of events. I had so this started actually with Christelle. Christelle had mentioned
she's
at some point.
She's a troublemaker. Everything starts with her.
I know. but in a good way. So she had written a blog post a while back, probably a couple of years ago or more, and it had kind of detailed her going to an event that we were both at the time, and where someone had challenged us to step forward and make a commitment in our communities where we can. And she had been named at that point to, I think, an advisory council on diabetes that the governor of Florida had set up. So she just mentioned, hey, look for this. Look for opportunities. Those opportunities will present themselves at some point. So, I kept thinking about that in the back of my head all this time. And earlier in the year, I'm commuting to work. I'm on the subway, and I see a billboard, an ad in the subway train that talked about a diabetes prevention program that the state had been initiating. And I wanted to write a story about it for the blog. So I started to research it online and looked around a little bit. And then on one of the pages I was looking, I saw a little link on the side of the page that said, Governor signs bill creating Council on Health and Wellness. And so I looked at it, and I saw that the council is going to consist of, it has 34 members. 16 of those members are from various organizations, including American Diabetes Association and the American Heart Association, the Department of Aging, the Department of Health, that kind of thing. And then 18 members are just members from various walks of life, including patients. So I applied. I didn't think that they would even contact me again. They did. And oddly enough, they contacted me when I was in the hospital. I had an appendectomy about 7 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, something like that. And they contacted me at that point, and I took a few days to get back to them. And they let me know that I was appointed to the council. So that's very exciting, and it's kind of a different role. It's one that I had never imagined that I would take on when I got involved in the community. And the really interesting part about this, I think, is that, yes, I obviously want to bring my diabetes knowledge to the table and my diabetes advocacy to the table, but I am also going to be advocating for people living with other conditions, and that is a real turn of events for me.
That's just wonderful. Keep us posted on that. I think that sounds so interesting, and a place where you can really start, meeting people and making an impact, beyond that Me Too moment that we talked about earlier. We can help one another, but when you can really kind of, I know you're not making policy, but when you can sit near the people who do, you really might be able to make a change.
Yeah, well, we all deserve to have a voice in the room, and I had a boss a long time ago who said the people in the room get to make the decisions. And so, when we can, we need to be in the room.
Let me just, before I let you go, Steve, I'm curious too, when you go to a conference with adults, something like the Diabetes On Conference, or even like a Friends for Life where there are kids and families, how do you feel when you walk into that room? Are you excited? Are you nervous? It's not something that everybody is lucky enough to go to. And I'm just trying to kind of let people know what it's like.
Yeah. Well, the first thing that I will tell you is that it is very, very inclusive. It can seem like it's not inclusive, and especially when you go to something like Friends for Life, because so many of those people have been together over a number of years together, and they're used to being with each other. But I've never sat down at a table with people I didn't know at Friends for Life and not made friends. So it's remarkable how inclusive the community is, and that includes at conferences. I will tell you, when I first started going to things, really what I wanted to do was twofold. I wanted to learn as much as I could, but I also wanted to take what I learned and share it with the rest of the community. Even if it was something that other people already knew about, there might be one or two people who might read it who had never heard of this stuff. So I felt really great about being there, but I also felt a responsibility to the degree that I wanted to make sure that I shared what I found out. I've not done that as much at conferences lately, and sometimes that's because you start to hear things that you've heard before, you've talked about, or you've shared already. But also at things like, actually at Friends for Life, I wound up I was in the exhibition hall a lot. I was working for DPAC, for Diabetes Patient Advocacy Coalition, at their table, and so I wound up not getting to a lot of sessions. So different dynamics in different conferences. There are things where you really, really want to share a lot about what's going on. Sometimes it has to do with facts, and sometimes it has to do with conversations in the room and feelings of what's going on. I remember one in August that I went to that Kelly Close and the Diatribe Foundation had sponsored, and it was a continuation of some meetings they had been having with academics and researchers and healthcare professionals, industry people, FDA, and it's all about A1C, and going beyond A1C is actually the theme of this. And so the idea is to say, okay, A1C is a number, but it's only an average, so what can we do to be more specific to help people care for others with diabetes, help educate people with diabetes, and help people with diabetes manage better on their own? You know, how do we go beyond A1C and defining some of the things that make up our diabetes life? And that was a remarkable thing to go to. I was just a patient sitting in the room. There were, I don't know, maybe 3-4 patients in the whole room of 100 people. And to hear some of the conversations that went on, I just felt so lucky to be there, because those are things that most people don't get to go to if they're patients or they're caring for someone who's living with diabetes. So I felt a particularly responsibility to share that with everyone else so that they would have an idea that, hey, I didn't just go to this thing. I actually went to it, and here's what I learned.
Oh, that's terrific. And just one more question. I think a lot about adults who may be alone. You know, I know enough families of kids who said, oh, you know, I didn't know there was anybody else like me. And then I went to the walk and there were all these people there, or, you know, there was another kid at school, or we went to diabetes camp. But I worry sometimes about adults who are diagnosed. And as an adult, you kind of feel like, well, I should be able to do this. You know, I don't need to go to camp, or I don't need to go to these conferences. Any advice for people who may have found the podcast and, you know, and are isolated, and who maybe think, well, how could I possibly benefit from being part of this community?
You know, first of all, I mean, kids who go to camp are extremely fortunate, and it's a wonderful experience. But those kids also go to class, you know, in the fall and winter and spring, and those kids sometimes also feel very alone. So feeling alone can come and go at times. But, yeah, there are adults out there who they may live on their own. They may not know anybody else living with diabetes. I think I knew one other person living with diabetes for years before I discovered the community. So I think there are various things that people can take from the diabetes community and the diabetes online community. Some of it is knowledge. So if you don't want to get involved, at least you can find out the information. There's a lot online. There are various places where you can source information. But if you want to get involved, and if you want to get to know people, you can certainly do that. People are generally very kind. I wouldn't have tackled some of the things that I've tackled over the years without the support of people in the community. If those people had been like, oh, yeah, this is ridiculous, then I probably wouldn't have done some of those things. So I'm not sure if I'm really answering your question, but I think going to conferences is great. It's harder, you know, when it's not in your geographical area. I'm lucky I live in Baltimore, so a lot goes on in Washington, D.C., and it's only an hour away, so that's not so hard for me. But there are ways to make yourself heard if you want to be heard. There are ways to ask questions. There are certainly forums online. 2 Diabetes is up and running still, and so 2 Diabetes is a great place to meet other people and to just ask a question and get a bunch of answers. And there are resources for us, even if they're not always the in-person opportunities.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for sharing some time with me. It's been great to get to know you a little bit more and to learn a little about the things you're doing. I mean, you're so busy and you have a job.
Yeah, I have a full-time job, yeah.
But I really appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing your stories. Thanks again.
Thank you, Stacey.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about Stephen, I'll link up to his blog and his podcast, as I do with every guest and every topic every week at diabetes-connections.com. And of course, in the show notes. And the show notes are a very quick and easy way to see more about the program. You can just click it on whatever podcast you're listening to. There's almost always a very easy way to find out more about the show. If you're listening on the Diabetes Connections app, we have our own app for Android and for iOS for Apple. Very easy that way. And of course, off Facebook and Twitter, not the easiest to get the show notes, but that's why there's always the website. And if you're on Facebook, I hope you're in the Facebook group. I put a lot of information there as well. You know, Facebook has these algorithms that change all the time. And so if you like the page, which is awesome, and I hope you like the Diabetes Connections page, unfortunately, you don't see everything that goes along with it. But in the Facebook group, you never miss a post. So we're kind of moving everything over there. Although that page they'll still be there. You'll still be able to get the show. But a lot more of the fun stuff is in the group. All right, in my community connection today, playing professional sports means generally that you're in great shape. You know, so when you hear about an NBA Hall of Famer that develops type 2 diabetes just one season after he retires, it sounds kind of off, right? How does that happen? Well, Dominique Wilkins was 6 feet 8 inches tall with 8% of body fat, you know, pretty incredible physical condition when he was diagnosed. And he was known as the human highlight film, but he knew something was off toward the end of his playing days. Now, Wilkins is now working with Dario. That's the meter company, smart glucose meter that plugs into your iPhone. You may have seen this. It's small. It's black, white, and orange. And of course, we'll link everything up with that. But, I'm not a huge basketball fan, and you might be able to tell from this interview, but this really was a fun interview. And hey, I did my best. Hey, thanks for joining me. I'm excited to talk to you today. Dominique, thanks for spending some time.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
You got it. So let's just start off with the surprising information that somebody in the kind of shape that you were in when you were retiring could get type 2 diabetes. Are you still surprised by that?
Not anymore. I mean, I used to be surprised, but, the thing about diabetes is it's a very hard disease to detect if you're in great shape. I spent my whole career training, and so, it was kept at bay because I was in such great shape. But once I slowed down, and retired, a year after I retired, I found I was a type 2 diabetic.
Did you start feeling a certain way? I mean, what made you get checked out, or was this part of a regular schedule checkup?
It wasn't that I was sick. I just felt a little off. And I hadn't been for a checkup for a while, so I went in, and they did a bunch of tests. And about 2 hours after doing the test, they just decided, we had some good news and bad news. The good news is you're not dying. The bad news is you're diabetic. You have to have a lifestyle change right now. And so, watching my father and grandfather were both from type 1 diabetes, and I decided I wasn't going to let that do to me what it did to my father and grandfather. So I started managing it, started drinking a lot of water, started working out when I found out, and changed some of my habits. I hadn't had orange juice in over 18 years.
Your grandfather and your father had type 1?
Yes, they died of type 1 diabetes.
Oh, my gosh. So obviously a different time and a different type of diabetes, but what do you remember about growing up around that?
We didn't pay much attention to it because it was just something we thought that, older people get. That was just our ignorance to the disease. But we didn't think much about it. They called it sugar back then. We just thought that was a sickness you got when you got older.
So when you were diagnosed, what kind of lifestyle changes did you make? As you said, you were still in good shape.
No, actually, I wasn't in the shape I should have been in once I retired because I stopped training. And so I had to get back to doing some things I used to do. I started working out, and I lost 35 pounds in 2.5 months. Oh, wow.
Now, I have to ask you, were you under a physician's care? Was it something you just said, I'm going to the gym nonstop, or were you careful?
No, I just did it all on my own.
Oh, my goodness.
Just decided that I was going to, usually there's another opponent I compete with. As long as I stayed ahead of it, I was winning.
Did you start talking about it right away? Was this something that you said to friends and family, look, I'm dealing with?
Oh,
or
yeah.
Was it, okay.
Right away. I started talking right away about it, started doing, tours all over the country with Novo Nordisk Pharmaceuticals at the time. And so I did a lot of great work.
That's great. I'm asking because, the first reaction that I'm sure you encountered was what I said was, how could this happen? You're in such great shape. You're a professional athlete. Were you finding that you were, answering a lot of questions about myths and misconceptions?
Oh, yeah. And it's a lot of myths. There's a lot of misconceptions as far as how you manage it. People have their own different reasons for, using different management, methods. But there's three things that keeps you healthy, and that's diet, exercise, and medication.
Do you think people are reluctant, though, to take medication for type 2 diabetes, that in some ways, maybe they've failed if they need to have medication or insulin?
Well, I found, I think over time you just find different medications you use to help yourself. And I've done that because sometimes body gets used to a certain medication. So you're always trying different things to help you manage it. And I find that, taking a different oral medication, and I take an insulin shot and a non-insulin, it helped me manage it along with my device, my Dario, which keeps a log and a track of my sugar levels, and something I can just automatically send right to my doctor or physician on my smartphone.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Yeah, let's talk about that because we've talked about the Dario here on the show before, and this is very simple. It's a blood glucose meter, but that it goes to your smartphone. For people with type 2, many times it's difficult to have a regular schedule where they're checking blood sugar. People are reluctant. People are nervous. I know a lot of people with type 2 diabetes who don't check their blood sugar as much as their physicians would like them to. How does this make it easier?
That's because they stick it themselves. But you have to keep a portfolio of your health. And so that's the only way your doctor knows what's going on with your health is to keep track. And my Dario is a device that I've had quite some time now that really helped me manage it. And it's so small, it's easy to carry, it's easy to use. And again, you don't have to call your doctor or go to the doctor's office to get all your readings and your glucose numbers. You can just send it to them on your smartphone. Yeah,
it's interesting to see how the technology has changed. Do you remember what the first meter you had? Do you remember anything about it or what it,
Yeah, it was a kind of a dinosaur. It seemed like I had to prick myself 100 times. But, as time goes on, technology changes, and Dario has brought a new technology to the market that's been great. I often send to mydario.com to really, find out more information, how to use it, because it's a very easy device to use, but something to educate yourself about.
Is there anything over the last 14 years that's been really difficult for you? You're in a good place now, obviously. You exercise, you're eating right. Mm-hmm. Anything that's still really tough for you that you're thinking, man, if only? Is it food? Is it, wanting to sleep late?
Yeah. Well, actually, it's been over 18, about 18 now.
Oh, wow.
Now. But, you always find things that you wish you could eat more of. But, we have to splurge a little because you still got to live, but your body lets you know how much. Like growing up, your favorite piece of apple pie or pecan pie or, something like that. And you tend to miss a little more. But over time, when you stay away from it, you don't miss it as much.
All right. So I asked my listeners, and I got a couple of basketball questions for you if you have a couple of minutes here. I know you got a plane to catch.
Uh-huh.
So Sam wanted to know, what was one of your favorite fast break dunk memories? Do you have anything stand out clear in your mind from when you were playing?
Oh man, it's a lot of them. Probably against Boston, a couple of my highlight dunks against them, and definitely some that I've had against Milwaukee Bucks. And that one of the guys there, for 9 years didn't speak to me until after I retired, because he was really upset that I had one of my most memorable plays over top of him, so he didn't take too kindly to it.
That's funny. Now, I think everybody's a professional. People really hold grudges like that?
Oh, in our day, yeah. It's not like now. It was personal.
And then Sam wanted to know if you remembered how many dunks have you shattered the glass?
Twice.
Oh, what's going through your brain when something like that happens?
It's the biggest high you can imagine. There's no high bigger than shattering a backboard.
That's great. Patrick had written, what is your opinion about the current situation between NBA players and officials? Players constantly arguing, officials seemingly wanting to steal the show. Can you comment on that at all?
Well, I don't think it's that. I don't think it's the officials wanting to steal the show. I think they had to change the way they officiate over time. I mean, they got a difficult job. You know, hey, as players, we always complain. There ain't nothing new.
Who do you watch? I mean, who are you when you watch now? Who lights you up? Who gets your attention?
I mean, I watch all the great players. You know, James Harden, LeBron, Kevin Durant, Westbrook. It's just so many. I mean, really good players in the league and great players. That you know. I mean, I'm a basketball fan, so I watch them all. And the young great players in today's game, I get a big enjoyment out of watching these guys.
That's awesome. What's your advice for kids who may be listening and have NBA dreams? You know, is that something that is achievable still?
Yeah, it's always achievable, depending on how big your heart is and how hard you're willing to work and willing to work on the things you're most weakest at. You know, become more fundamentally sound young person. That's on and off the court, because all of it plays into the same thing in your growth and trying to be a young player. But don't let anybody tell you what you can't do, because no one knows your heart but you.
You know, you said like back in the day, like, I mean, you're still, you know, this is not really back in the day to me when you were playing, but you know that it was different. What are some of the differences then to now? Is there anything that stands out to you as a former player?
And as far as what now? For
basketball, when you were playing versus now, is there anything that really does stand out to you?
It was different. I mean, you're talking about basketball in the late 70s, early 80s.
Yeah.
In the 90s, I mean, back when we played basketball, the game was physical. And, you know, there was a lot of skilled, very, very skilled players in that era. You know, it was just, you know, and every era is different, you know, and every era has their time, and we've had our time. Now it's time for these guys now to do what they do. And so, I've always been a fan of the game outside of what I did.
Do you still play at all? Back, you know, just pick up or anything like that?
I shoot around a little bit, but nothing much really. You know, I might shoot around with my sons a little bit, but that's about it. I have a son play at the University of Virginia, and I have a younger son, Jacob Dominique, is coming up. He's going to be a great player one day, if he listens.
That's great. Very cool. Before I let you go, just again with diabetes, you know, a lot of people worry about talking to their doctor. I've had a lot of listeners who have said that they feel like they would like a better relationship with their doctor. You know, people feel, you know, that sometimes the doctor will say things that are more critical. What's your advice about that? I mean, I'm sure you have a good relationship with your endocrinologist.
Well, you know, and I think people are afraid of doctors because they're afraid to hear bad news, so they never tell full truth about what's going on with their health. So it's you know, it's really a major stigma on doctors and patients, but patients have to build a better relationship with their physician, because at the end of the day, they know more about your health than you do.
Good point. So, hey, do you have anybody in your life who's kind of like the food police, looking over your shoulder saying, "Don't eat that," or "Hey"?
Who's the food police?
Yeah,
my girlfriend. She's a big food police. She tells me everything I should. I'm like, all right, okay.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really appreciate it. We'll link up all the information on Dario and make sure people are familiar with that. But thanks so much for sharing your story.
You got it.
More information about Dario and about Dominique Wilkins and his partnership with them at diabetes-connections.com. And, you know, we actually did a whole show in 2016 about, well, not the whole show, but it included information about Dario. It was with Scott Skolnick, who was working for them at the time, and he was one of the first people to try out the early iteration of the bionic pancreas. And that was a great conversation with Scott. So I'll link that up as well. And, you can always search up episodes at the website. There's a search box on the upper right-hand side. So if you'd like to learn more about any topic, bionic pancreas, diabetes at Disney World, whatever you can think of, put a keyword in there and see what pops up. We've got more than 150 episodes now and lots of great topics. So I hope that'll help you find what you're looking for. And if you can't find it and there's something you really want to learn more about or somebody you want me to talk to, let me know. Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. That's Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. In our Know Better segment this week, help for adjusting insulin dosing based on the Dexcom G5 trend arrows. This is really interesting, and we're going to look at this separate guidelines for adults and for children. Know Better is brought to you by Know Better Foods. Delicious, clean, nutritious. They are made with superfoods like chia, flax, coconut, almonds, and egg whites. Yummy bready food, what I call bready foods, right? Like waffles and buns and donuts and muffins, all grain, gluten, wheat, soy, dairy, peanut, yeast, and guilt-free. And I am starting to travel now with the cookies because, a lot of these events I go to have awesome gluten-free or gluten-friendly lunches and meals. But then I'm back in my hotel room and I'm like, you get that little munchie late at night. Not that kind of munchie, come on. But you want to have a snack. And I find that it's really hard to find gluten-free as you travel. There's not a lot of portable stuff other than Kind bars, which after a while, they're a little sweet for me. But I love the cookies, especially the cinnamon cookies are less sweet. When I want something sweet, I'll have a chocolate chip cookie, or their muffins are so good, the chocolate chip muffins. And you can get more information, of course. Go to diabetes-connections.com, click on the No Foods logo, and use the promo code Stacey10 to save on any order. The Endocrine Society recently published a couple of recommendations, separate guidelines, one for adults, one for kids, on adjusting insulin dosing based on trend arrows from the Dexcom G5. Now, I'm going to go through this a little bit, but I can't really explain it as well as you can read it, if that makes sense. So I'm going to link this up, and I urge you to take a look at this because there's a bunch of tables that talk about the adjustment guidelines for insulin dosing, and this is all based on your insulin sensitivity. And that's how much 1 unit of insulin is expected to lower your blood sugar. A lot of people will also call this the correction factor. So that's what this is all based on. And they say they don't replace standard calculations for insulin dosing, but they can help fine tune it for people who are wearing the G5. So, you know what they're going for here. If your blood sugar is rising, going up, you need more insulin. If blood sugar is falling, you may need less insulin. And this is all based on how sensitive you are to it and how pronounced, how strong the trend is. Double arrow, single arrow, that sort of thing. And the guidelines are very visual. Like I said, they're tables, and they'll show you if it's 2 arrows up and your correction factor is this, adjust this way. It's really clear. And what's interesting is, and the article I'm linking up is from diatribe.org, and in their write-up, they say, this is interesting for people to use on their own, but they could ultimately help in the development of CGM-based insulin dose calculators. So in other words, you could get help from an app that would say, your double arrow's up, so adjust this much. Which, when you think about the closed loops that are coming, might not be something that you do on your own with a pump, but you could do with a pen, right? You could do with injections. So this is really interesting stuff. I urge you to check it out. Again, it's an article from Diatribe, but it talks about how to use a CGM, specifically the Dexcom G5, to better adjust for insulin dosing. And they do caution if you've got Medtronic's Guardian Sensor 3 or Abbott's Freestyle Libre, unfortunately, these guidelines are not for you. These are device specific. So they're only to be used with the G5. And now you know better. With all the travel that has been going on this month and coming up in the next couple of weeks, just a couple of personal things. My daughter is taking the SAT. Cannot believe it. She's a junior in high school. I've mentioned this before. And yeah, that's her fun activity this past weekend is she got to wake up early and go take the SAT with hundreds of her closest friends. And Benny has started Ultimate Frisbee. yet another sport we've never done before. He loves doing this to me. God forbid he stay with baseball. So we did football in the fall. Now he's going to do ultimate frisbee, and I'll keep you posted. My guess is that it's going to be like every other sport where we figure it out right as the season ends. But I love that he likes to try new things. I hope he has a lot of fun. And if anybody out there is a big ultimate frisbee person and has any dosing or adrenaline high guidelines or that kind of stuff, let me know, because I'm always interested in what you have to say. You can always drop me a line over social media. The Facebook group is great to do that too, or email. Next up for us is some family stuff. We've got a little bit of travel. I told you this month is crazy, for family events and Passover and good stuff like that. And then in April, we have our local JDRF walks in the Charlotte area. I'm going to a conference called Touched by Type 1, and that's in Orlando in late April. I'm very excited about that one, and got some other good projects going on behind the scenes that I will keep you posted on. A big thank you to my editor, to John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Always appreciate him and appreciate you listening every week as well. I love doing this. You know that. I hope you can hear in my voice what a privilege it is to bring you this show every week and spend an hour with people who get it right. I'm Stacey Sims, and I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.